Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. At this time of year, it's always a trade-off between letting plants be free and loose and have that lovely sort of careless abandon, and yet trying to stop it looking chaotic. Just lifting things up so that they hold their own, whatever the weather. And the beauty of these wire supports is that you don't really see them. They blend in very well, and you can use them for single plants or great clumps. Coming up on today's show, Frances returns to her shared allotment plot in Bristol.
The allotment is really progressing, but the lovely thing about it is there's always that bit of escapism when you come up here.
And we go to Kent, discover one man's passion for wild orchids.
When I saw my first orchid, it felt like an emotional punch to the chest, and I still get that when I find a new orchid even to this day.
And I shall be sorting out my cottage garden borders, as well as harvesting my garlic. I've been having something of a salvia crisis, well, in particular, salvia garanetica problem. Which is, not that I can't grow them, they grow perfectly well, I take cuttings, but they've stopped flowering for me. And that's over the last 2 or 3 years, whereas for a long time, their blue to slightly mauvish flowers were a mainstay of the late summer dual garden. Now, a few weeks ago, I went to see Jimmy Blake in Ireland at his garden at Hunting Brook, and I asked him about salvia, because he's a salvia expert, and he said the key to get them flowering really well and reliably is treat them rough. Don't feed them, give them poor soil, good drainage, lots of sunshine, make them struggle, and then they'll all flower. So I thought I would plant a couple here in the dry garden, which has got the poorest soil at Longmeadow, it's got full sun, and see how they perform. So if I try and get in doing as little damage as possible, I've got a space in here for this plant. But you can see that this soil, if I get a handful of it here, that is not standard Longmeadow soil. It looks quite nice, but it's very gritty. It's stony. So it should be perfect for the salvias. So if I dig a hole in here, as best I can, you can see it is. So this will have a tough time. It has a very strong smell, slightly pineapple-y, but very, very distinctive. So that goes in there like that, and backfill around it. Now, it doesn't matter how harshly you intend to treat a plant, you must water it in when you plant it, particularly at this time of year. Give it a really good soak, even if you never water it again. The dry garden at this time of year becomes slightly anarchic, which I like. Things like the steeper and the teasels and the cardoons are soaring up, but underneath we have lots of self-sown annuals and perennials. So by and large, it makes a very easy, happy mix. However, some gardens have to be made in the face of extreme circumstances and conditions. And Joe has been down to North Devon to visit one garden that exactly fits that bill.
Welcome to Foamley, a stunning coastal garden packed with exotic plants, offering breathtaking views over the coastline of North Devon. It's fantastic to see so many plants from around the world thriving here on this challenging and exposed sloping site. Foamley is the home of Beth Smith, a keen gardener and plantswoman who's been cleverly curating this very special garden for 17 years. Beth, this is a stunning garden, absolutely beautiful, I have to say, an incredible view. But it's a tricky site, it's incredibly exposed, it's on a slope. It must be quite difficult to garden here.
I started with very little knowledge of coastal gardening. And of course, when you start a coastal garden, then you have to ensure windbreaks. There were the tamarisk hedges and the fuchsia hedges, but I introduced more hedges.
But the tamarisk hedge is beautiful. Has that been there a long time?
I'm almost sure that it was planted when the house was built in 1902. I had a friend cut it with a chainsaw right to the base, right to the ground, and within a month it was shooting again.
Well, I love the red stems. You don't imagine the new growth is going to be so beautiful.
It is very beautiful. It waves in the breeze. It's very beautiful, and it's important to the plants behind it.
And the hard landscaping and these paths and walling, and you've used slate throughout, so
Yes,
you've used the vernacular.
Yes.
And you've put that middle wall in there.
Yes, that's an extra wall for soil retention, because over 30 years the soil had slipped down the slope, so we had to drag it back. We had a local craftsman build slate delivered on an empty garden. It took nearly 3 months to do.
And then the paths are more slate. I mean, everything's slate here. I mean,
Yes, the shillet that you see on the paths is the leftover from all the work. But there were some big slabs which we used for steps so that we could actually come and go from top to bottom. And then at one point, the craftsman said, "Would you like a rockery?" So I said, "Well, yes, I'd love a rockery." And it's become my favourite part of the garden.
And you have a huge range of plants from
Yes.
all over the world.
Yes, from all over the world.
So you're a plant collector, really, aren't you? You're a plant fiend.
Yes.
But you hold a national collection of flomis. You must be really passionate about flomis.
I'm not sure I'd use the word passionate, but I have come to love them very much.
You got
And
a national collection.
I know.
You must love them.
I love the fact that they're part of a conservation scheme. I'm keen on conservation in all its aspects, so to have some of it, right here with plants, which are so vital to all of us. So yes, that does fill me with some joy.
Beth, the view is just stunning, but you have to respect a view like that, and you have done with your garden. Your garden's a collection of plants, but you still thought about how it connects to the extended landscape.
Yes, it's a borrowed view, and it is our water feature. So we have to major on the water feature.
I'd love to have a water feature like that, I have to say. That is some water feature. It's fabulous.
Yes.
This agave americana is just such a fantastic architectural specimen. Beth bought it for £1 in a small little pot, and look at it now, it's absolutely huge and looks brilliant next to this aloe striatula, which she says is pretty hardy as long as you've got really good drainage. A very exotic combination in the rockery part in the garden right at the top here. And these plants have responded to the microclimate really well. That's the way Beth designed the garden. She didn't come up with a plan, she's had to respond to what she's got. Now this plant is Flomis russelliana and it's commonly available, a lot of us grow it. It's just one of Beth's national collection, and I love the way she's integrated these plants into the garden rather than growing them separately in a botanical border. And here we've got a great composition. We've got the frothy Alchemilla mollis next to the Cape Daisy, the lovely Osteospermum, and they lead the eye up to this wonderful Flomis, which is in full bloom at the moment. The bees are absolutely loving it, and in the winter it'll keep its nice structural form silhouetted against the low winter sun. It looks absolutely beautiful, and then cut it back in spring. It's a herbaceous form and it'll just spring up again. And I think that those three... Now this is a shrubby Flomis, so it develops a nice woody framework, reaches about 1 metre tall and has these lovely soft pink whorls of flower against these soft sage green leaves. So next to it we've got Eryngium Platinum, which is green now, but it'll turn a sort of silvery metallic colour when it flowers. And then beyond it, the graceful arching oak grass of Stipa gigantea. And then the eye is drawn up to the spine of that echium at the back there. And really this composition is about the different forms of the plants combining nicely together. One of the key hard landscaping elements that Beth put in when she took charge of this garden was this absolutely gorgeous retaining wall made out of slate. And when you look at the details of the wall, you see these lovely little ferns growing out of it, and it's been backfilled with soil with excellent drainage, plenty of grit added. So plants like succulents and alpines are growing happily alongside each other. And I love this combination of the sedum, the fleshy leaves and the bright reds and greens coming through. And next to it, we've got this lovely little Artemisia, feathery, silvery foliage, and the combination is just beautiful. And then you remember where you are because you can hear the crashing waves, and you turn around and of course there's that amazing view, and you've gone from the micro to the macro. It's astonishing.
I do envy gardens with a view like that, and on a slope to give you all the different levels. It really, really is such a beautiful setting. This is my garlic bed. Now, as you can see, it's looking a little orange, and that is because it has been afflicted by leek rust. You can see that the leaves are covered with what the books will cheerfully call orange pustules. Now, it looks pretty bad. In fact, it's not a disaster. It's really common on leeks, hence the name, and on garlic, and you can get it on any of the allium family. And the reason why they've got it is because about 3 weeks ago we had a period of very humid, rather warm weather. The implications for this garlic is that the green leafy growth will die back. And that means that the bulb will also stop growing. One of the reasons you don't worry about rust too much is that it doesn't affect the bulb. It may look a bit manky above ground, but below ground it's perfectly edible and perfectly nice. That will be beautiful in the kitchen. These went into the ground in September. It's a very early variety called Sprint. Sprint are fairly small, and when you harvest garlic, always use a fork. Never yank them out the ground, because what you don't want to break is the junction between the roots and the bulb itself, because that will stop it storing. In order to store, you need all that to be left on, and then when it's dried off completely, you can just cut it off with a knife. Just gently tease the soil off the roots. Don't be rough with those roots. The vast majority of these are going to be stored and eaten across the next 12 months. So the next thing to do is to dry them. The easiest way is leave them on the ground if it's not going to rain, and they can stay outside unharmed for days if it remains dry. But as soon as it rains, or if you think it's going to rain, bring them in, store them where there's lots of ventilation. In the past, I've made a rack with chicken wire and laid them on that, but recently I tend to keep them in the greenhouse. And they will take at least 2 and sometimes 3 or even 4 weeks to properly dry. Now, I've had a vegetable plot all my adult life. I've grown vegetables since I was a small boy, and I just take it for granted. But increasingly, young people in their 20s and early 30s just don't have access to any land. And Frances has been in that position. And it's not until this year that she's been able to find an allotment which she is sharing down in Bristol. And that's where we find out.
With Luke away on holiday, I'm holding the fort, and there's plenty to be getting on with. Luke has allowed me to share part of this allotment, but it's still quite a big responsibility being here on my own. The allotment is really progressing, and it is incredible how quickly time flies when you're here working away. But the lovely thing about it is there's always that bit of escapism when you come up here. The big bit of news is that finally these raised beds are all finished. I have the top 4 and Luke has the bottom 2, so he has some sweet peas and things growing down there. And I'm turning this, my last bed, into a brassica bed, so I'm planting the kale sprouts I had growing in the polytunnel. I think we spent so much time building stuff and improving the what I'm going to do is plant some flowering plants and a bit more lush growth just to make it look a little bit nicer. But the chard is looking really good, and there are 2 courgettes forming on those plants, which is very exciting. But there's plenty more to show you. When you plant any brassicas, it's essential that you net them to protect them from cabbage white butterflies and from birds. This is the seating area that Luke's been building, and it's really lovely because it's surrounded by fruit trees, so eventually in years to come it will be a very private and secluded area. These 2 beds are coming on nicely, but it's a bit of a mixed bag. So here the black fly have attacked my broad beans. I'm not too worried because there are loads of ladybirds eating them, which is nice. It's a whole ecosystem. And also my chickpeas, which are the ones I'm really interested in growing because I've never grown them before, are doing well. So if the broad beans are a decoy, that's fine by me. The flowers all around are coming up really nicely, so hopefully that'll be looking very lovely soon. My sweet corn are doing quite well, but the rocket that's planted in between them has begun to flower, so I'm just going to cut those flowers off and encourage it to regenerate a little bit. And I can see that the slug problem, if you remember from last time, although it's still here, the sheepswall's doing all right. The eggshells maybe aren't doing quite as well, and I can see that Luke's put some beer traps down as well on his side, so I think it's fair to say I won that little experiment. That job done, on to the next one. With Luke away, he's left me in charge of finishing the herb garden at the top of the plot. But before I start planting, there's a group nearby who really know a thing or two about herbs. They even have their own medicine garden. This I have to see. Bex Griffiths, along with a group of trained herbalists, set up the garden 6 years ago in the hope of growing plants for medicinal purposes. One community project supported by this is Herbalists Without Borders, which is now making a real difference.
Herbalists Without Borders is a project to provide free herbal medicine for migrants who have trouble accessing healthcare. We make the herbal medicines by either growing the herbs or harvesting wild herbs.
But to practice as you do actually need a lot of training and kind of qualifications to do that.
I am a medical herbalist, that's 4 years training, and I see people in a clinic. So we've got about 60, 70 different varieties of herbs, and we've divided them into body systems. We're standing by the lung bed, so these are all herbs that can help with chest infection, they can help with inflammation or help get phlegm off the chest. Behind you is the well-being bed, and that's like a lot of the herbs to do with calming people, supporting with depression, melancholy, anxiety, help with a deep, restful sleep. I've got marshmallow here. It's very soothing, very cooling, so we use it for any inflammation of the stomach, the chest.
Amazing. So marshmallows are good for you?
Marshmallows, well, not the marshmallows you buy in the shop.
We're setting up a herb garden on our allotment. Do you have any advice about how to get things to thrive here?
I would say first know your varieties, because a lot of herbs have cultivars as well. So we like to get the original herb, the wild herb, so it's good to know the botanical name. And then don't feed the herbs, because if you feed them, they don't have enough challenge. So they don't produce the secondary metabolites, which are these chemicals that plants produce to fend off an insect attack, or they will heal a wound. And these secondary metabolites are actually the medicine for them and the medicine for us.
Never underestimate the power of plants, and always seek advice from a trained expert or health professional if you want to use them medicinally. To prepare this bed for the herbs, it took a lot of weeding and breaking up of the clay soil. I put cardboard in, compost and some grit, because a lot of Mediterranean herbs need a very good drainage. When I'm placing these out, I'm trying to be aware of containing things like mint and lemon balm in smaller sections so that they don't go too mad, or else they can spread a little bit far. The herb I absolutely love is lemon verbena. It makes a great tea, but it also has an incredible smell. It gets quite big, but as long as you cut it back fairly regularly, which we will be because we'll be using it, it will be alright in this space here. People always rave about lavender, but I think with very good reason. It looks fantastic, it smells fantastic, and the flowers are amazing for pollinators. Bees absolutely cover them in the summer. It flowers all summer and all autumn, and it has amazing colour uses, as well as being really good for relaxing. So I think it's a bit of an all-rounder, really. Nick's finally actually tasting something that you've planted on your allotment. I can't wait for Luke to come back and see all the work that I've done. Share a nice cup of tea with him in this very spot. Job well done, I think.
I wish just everybody had access to an allotment of some sort. But even if you have got access to space, it doesn't guarantee success. I've got good garlic, these spuds are looking good, I've even got reasonable parsnips this year. But this area here has been, as it is, I've got about 7. Total failure. In fact, this has happened to me before, and I suspect it's happened to you too if you've grown carrots over any time. They are surprisingly erratic to germinate. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, your techniques, or the soil. It's just what carrots do sometimes. And it's not too late to have another sowing now, which you can start to harvest at the end of summer and will sit in the ground all winter for you to draw upon whenever you need them. And what I do is simply on the same spot, just rake it over, loosen the soil a bit, and re-sow it. Now the last lot I grew in rows. But I'm going to broadcast these, and the technique I use for broadcasting is in rows created by boards. So we'll put a board there like that, and then this other board, something like that. So where the boards are will be clean lines where I can distinguish the difference between little weeds growing and the carrots. Now I'm going to sow a variety that not only have I never grown before, but I've never heard of before. It is called Nigel. This is Nigel the carrot. So just a light sprinkle. And I'm going to make this packet cover the whole of this area. And they should germinate in about 2 weeks. It has been very dry here, so by soaking the soil that will stimulate germination, and I really don't need to water them again unless we have a real drought, in which case we won't be wanting to waste water on the garden. So that's it. If they don't germinate, I've missed the boat this year, but I think they will. I think we'll have Nigel carrots by September. Now, still to come. Nick goes to see the newly refurbished Temperate house at Kew, and Adam visits a community garden right in the heart of Birmingham. At this point of summer, you sometimes have to make some tough decisions because the garden is performing wonderfully well. The cottage garden here is just overflowing with roses, there's colour everywhere, but you have to see the big picture, and a lot of plants have gone over. Here we have the remnants of the forget-me-nots, dead, dry, and these are biennials. They will die back now, set their seed, and new plants will grow next year. There are dead leaves from all the early flowering stuff out the way. See what gaps we've got, and then introduce new plants to extend the flowering season. So I'm going to start making a mess. The art of keeping a garden looking really good all the year round is one of constant tinkering. And in order to keep succession coming through, you have to keep adding plants, taking away, cutting back, encouraging, teasing, trying things out. And that's what I love about gardening. It's the art of gardening, not just the jobs that can be ticked off. Plenty of bare soil, so I'm going to start to fill that up again. I've got some nice new dahlias that I picked up at Gardeners World Live. Have a look at these. Now this is a dahlia with a slightly unfortunate name of Honka Fragile. But don't be put off by that, because there are a number of things I really like about it. One is the unusual star-shaped flowers, and this manages to combine strength and a degree of delicacy. And what I was particularly looking for, and increasingly am with dahlias, are tall, upright plants that will hold their own, that won't need a huge amount of staking, and you can put at the back or the middle of a border to give it vertical structure as well as horizontal. And I think this will do the job really well. So let's put it in position at the back and see if that's going to work. Like that. The great thing to remember when you put in dahlias or any tenderish plants at this time of year is that they are not permanent. The dahlia will be lifted and put into storage in November. So it's just got to perform for the second half of summer and into autumn. Dahlias will grow in light shade. They like sunshine, and you should give it to them when you can, but if you've got dappled shade, they will flower perfectly well. Okay, moving on. I am going to introduce this foxglove. I'm really keen on foxgloves at the moment. This is called polka dot pippa. It's got a pink touch with apricot and then this yellowy back. And I think that will work really well when you think of it with the achillea, with the lutea, with the rose. This is picking up those colours with a touch of pink. And it is sterile, so it will not set seed, but it's perennial. I'm going to plant these in a group, I think, in this space here. These plants will last 3, 4, even 5 years, and they will flower long after other foxgloves have set seed and got ready for the next year. Yeah, I think they look great. And of course the forget-me-nots and the daffodils and everything else. The secret of this is very tight control. It may look natural, but it's fine-tuning in great detail. But you can enjoy plants without any control whatsoever. To walk through the countryside at this time of year, enjoying wildflowers is just as much of a treat as visiting a garden. And we now go to Kent to join an enthusiast who gets his thrills from one particular group of wildflowers.
My name's John Dunn. I'm a nature writer from Shetland. My passion has been natural history for many years, but I have a particular fascination with orchids. When I saw my first orchid, it was like falling in love. I was only 9 years old. I didn't know that at the time, but it felt like an emotional punch to the chest, and I still get that when I find a new orchid, even to this day. The orchid in question, it was an early purple orchid, so it's one of the first ones to flower in Britain. And it's a slender orchid, which is an absolutely staggeringly beautiful plant, at least as exotic as its tropical counterparts. I'm not a ticker. I don't just want to see these things once and tick them off a list. That's not what does it for me. There's always a sense of appreciation of the beauty of each individual flower. When I saw my first lady orchid, it was a revelation, because they're not like some orchids which are quite small and unassuming. But a lady orchid is a magnificent thing. They're tall, they're architectural, they've got beautiful structure with the white frilly dress and the purple bonnet. But of course they vary wildly. You get pure white ones with apple green bonnets, and then you go right through to very dark suffused burgundy all over ones as well. There's 23,000 species worldwide, I think, possibly more. They vary in form. That's one of the particular charms about them. They come in all shapes and sizes and colours. But they all have one thing in common. They all have 3 petals, 3 sepals, and one of the petals is marvellously developed over and above its counterparts, and that's to act as a lure for pollinators. Here we've got one of the classic orchids of the woodland margin. This is a greater butterfly orchid, and they've got a really long spur at the back of each flower, which contains a small quantity of nectar at the very tip. And so only a pollinator with a really long tongue can reach that proboscis down to drink from the nectar. And in so doing, their foreheads come into contact with the pollen on the orchid. And when they fly away and go back to another butterfly orchid, pollination ensues. People might assume that you can't grow native or terrestrial orchids in their garden, and for the most part that's right. The ones which grow in the wild in Britain don't transplant into gardens. They invariably will die. But sometimes wild orchids will choose us and will actually turn up in our gardens under their own steam. Orchids seed is dust fine, and sometimes will just blow from a nearby wild population into a garden. Sometimes it's as simple as people going away on holiday for a few weeks and not mowing the lawn, and suddenly they'll come back and find they've got a beautiful stand of autumn ladies' tresses there in the lawn, which they never knew were there. But having said that, you can get some from specialist nurseries which will do really well in the garden as long as they're in conditions which are similar to those they're found in the wild. There's one particular family, the dactylarized and marsh orchids, which will do really well in the garden. They produce pink, white and purple spires of orchids and quite prolifically too. One of my absolute favourites are monkey orchids, which are one of the rarest orchids in Britain. They're only found at 3 sites in the whole of the country. This reserve that the monkey orchids are flourishing on is really special because it's an ancient and undisturbed meadow. It's probably not been ploughed for decades. It's enclosed in a wooded valley, so it's really sheltered. One of those 3 reserves, they're at the brink of extinction, so realistically this is one of only 2 places in Britain where you could expect to see monkey orchids. Each individual flower looks like a tiny capering monkey, complete with little arms and legs, and even a tiny monkey tail. They are absolutely one of my favourites. There are still hundreds, thousands of orchids I'd like to see, and every year I go back and see the same species I've seen before, and it's just as good. I think I'm always looking for orchids. I'm always on alert for them. I think I'm tuned into them now. It's become a lifelong obsession.
It is thrilling to come across an orchid or a group of orchids when you are out for a walk, but dig it up. There's something I just noticed yesterday, still there, is a swarm of bees up in the tree. Now they've come from my hives. The last few days we've had a lot of activity. Clusters of them clinging to the outside of the hive, lots of noise, and they were clearly getting ready to swarm. What happens when they swarm is a queen leaves the hive, taking her workers with her, which is why they've gathered like a sort of living cone, and there are thousands up there. And then those that are left in the hive will rapidly start breeding, and so the process goes. I made this soft fruit area last year, and most of it was planted up with young plants that quite frankly did very little last year. They just got their roots established, didn't bear any fruits, and that was fine. But this year they're starting to bear fruit. This is a tayberry. It's a cross between a raspberry and a blackberry, and I've got some fruit growing on last year's stems. It flowers and fruits on the previous year's growth. They're just beginning to show signs of ripening, and these will be ready in a few weeks' time. Last year's growth was modest by Tayberry standards, but this year's growth is twice as big. And so, if I tie it in as it goes, the new stems will be in place, tied and fan-shaped, ready for picking next year. Now, I've got a glove here because Tayberries are absolutely delicious, but they are prickly. And not just the stems, the leaves, all of it is prickly. We'll just tie this gently in place, but gloves make it 10 times worse, not least because I'm clumsy enough as it is. I need another hand. Now, why can't you tie ties? Nell, do you want to take my glove? Lily? Here, do you want that? Come here. Good girl. Now, Tayberries are really prickly, but worth it because they're delicious. Here is a plant that has no prickles at all. This is a blackberry. This is a variety called Apache, and it's completely thornless, absolutely smooth. You can see really vigorous, so it's a brilliant one to grow at home. They're really easy to grow. They'll take a bit of shade, they'll take sunshine, and They are truly delicious. As long as you've got a wall of some kind, that's all you need. Now, if you think I'm sounding a little bit smug about the soft fruit, then don't think it's gone all to plan. I've had one or two problems. Come and have a look at this. Which are fine, except for the fact, look at this little blighter here. These here are gooseberry sawfly. Now, gooseberry sawfly is a little fly that lays its eggs at the heart of the plant on the underside of leaves. The eggs then hatch out and the larvae slowly eat their way through the foliage of the plant. And there are only really two ways of getting rid of them. The most practical and easiest way is to knock them off, and you can do that either by hand or with a jet of water. Just water the bush down and that removes them. There is also a nematode that you can get, which if you apply at the right time, and like all nematodes, timing is essential, that will work as a natural kind of insecticide. But don't think about spraying them with a chemical, because it's such a blunt instrument and will kill other insects, and also you don't want chemicals around fruit that you're going to eat. Now, going from everyday gardening problems to horticultural glory, because Nick has been to Kew to pay a visit to the recently refurbished Temperate house.
Every time I come to Kew, I make a beeline for this building, the Temperate house. It's home to some of the rarest and most endangered plants in the world. Now, it's been closed for the last 5 years for a £41 million restoration project, but thankfully, it's finally reopened. The Kew Temperate House opened in 1863, and it's the largest Victorian glasshouse on the planet, covering a jaw-dropping 4,880 square metres. During its meticulous restoration, 69,000 elements of its complicated structure were removed, cleaned and repaired. 15,000 new panes of glass were carefully replaced, and the plants had to be specially housed in a temporary nursery. Altogether, it took 400 staff and contractors to complete this mammoth restoration project, taking nearly 2,000 days to complete. To find out more about how this incredible project was managed, I'm meeting Head of Glasshouses, Greg Redwood. Greg, the restoration of a Victorian glasshouse on this scale must have been a really kind of meticulous process.
Yes, there was different corrosion and different problems in different parts of the house. Large bits of timber were rotting. We had scaffolding holding up bits of the house in one of the octagons. If you notice, there's lots of acanthus leaves, flowers and other decorative material. They were all screwed on, but the screws that were fixing them had started to fall off, so we had bits of falling ironwork and wood.
I mean, there are thousands of plants in here. It must have been quite a process to remove everything beforehand.
Yeah, it's better for us to completely clear the house and replant, because then all the plants grow up together and you haven't got to try and establish a young plant under a thick canopy of evergreens. We repropagated thousands of other plants and just to grow new fresh ones, so we didn't save everything, but we repropagated.
Enhancing the environment for the plants.
In the 1970s, when they restored the building then, sealed shut a number of the side ventilators, both at the bottom walls and up in the roof. We reactivated all those so they all work, so that you get a crosswind through the house, which is much better for the plants. And we replaced all 15,000 panes of glass, and they're letting in a massive amount more light than was happening previously. The other thing we did was put a heating trench up the centre of the house, because that had been taken away. So that's all helped to improve the environmental growing conditions for the plants. Some of them have literally grown more in the first 3 months than they were growing a whole year before, because the soil was tired, the air was quite stagnant, light levels were low, so it's made a massive difference to it. And as the seasons go on, I think we'll get far better flowering and fruiting than we've ever had.
The South African collection here has always been a favourite of mine, and there's one rare plant that I'm really excited to see. Your cycads and encephalatus here are superb specimens, but I understand in South Africa there's a real problem with them in the wild. They're being stolen, so they're having to be microchipped to protect them. But this chap, this encephalatus, has got a bit more of a challenge on his hands, right?
Yes, this is what's referred to as the loneliest plant in the world. It's Encephalatus woodii. It was discovered in about 1895. The original clump, of which this is an offset, was male. No female plants have ever been found, so its future is somewhat bleak.
I mean, I guess one of the reasons that cycads and encephalatus have been around for millions of years is just how tough they are. I mean, the cuticle on the outside of this leaf, it's really, really, really solid. And the cones they produce are really quite different to a conifer, aren't they?
Yes, but interestingly, the whole plant is full of nasty toxins which would kill you or I if we ate any of them, but they've outlived all their predators apart from glasshouse mealybugs, which they occasionally get, but we can deal with that fairly easily.
So this living legend really needs a girlfriend, right?
Absolutely. Let's hope one day there's one hiding away somewhere.
are so many rare and valuable plants in the temperate house that have been historically used to soothe, heal and medicate. Greg, the plant you've got lurking in the wheelbarrow there is a favourite of mine, Catharanthus rosea, or the Madagascan periwinkle. I guess a lot of people will have seen it on holidays in the Mediterranean, where it's often used as a bedding plant.
Yes, Nick, it contains two compounds that are extracted from it called vincristine and vinblastine, and they're used to treat childhood leukemia. Prior to the discovery of those two chemicals, the prognosis for survival was 1 in 10. After the use of these chemicals, it's about 9 in 10, so it's made a huge difference. So that's why it's important to save any plant, because we don't know what chemicals most plants contain yet and what diseases they could potentially cure in the future.
The thing that also always surprises me about medicinal plants is, nearly without exception, they're all extremely poisonous, aren't they?
Yes.
And so the key message really is it's all about taking the right dose rate as prescribed to you by a doctor and never self-medicating.
Absolutely, and I would never have...
Incredibly beautiful.
Yes.
The main ethos of the Temperate House is planting for the future. A staggering 10,000 new plants being installed here. Looks like a pretty healthy leucadendron you've got, and so many fibrous roots down the edge here. Oh.
Turn it a little bit that way so that branch goes into the gap.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Now, I noticed that the soil, the medium that you're using, is really quite kind of coarse, quite sharply drained.
Yeah, this is a special mix that we have made for the South African plants, so it's got composted bark, coir, loam and coarse horticultural grit, and it's also very low in phosphorus, because these plants of the Proteaceae family have all evolved in areas where it's low in phosphorus. All of the trees and shrubs in here will be in here for a long time, so we're planted for future generations as well as ourselves.
Fantastic. I mean, I always admire so much the work of botanic gardens. Of course, it's all about conservation, preservation and education. That's happening actively here in this newly restored house. It's brilliant to see it, so keep up the good work and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I love Kew, and I first visited the Temperate House 40 years ago, so I can't wait to go back and see it, restored to its full glory. It's tempting at this time of year just to let things carry on a little bit more. Take the early flowering geraniums, geranium farm here. It's still flowering and will go on flowering for much of the summer, but less and less until there's just the odd little flower showing. But by cutting it back hard now, you do two things. One, it will grow back and will flower with re-infused energy and vigour, and also you create space around it, which you can plant into, and that will boost the performance later on in the summer. And next to it, I've got an oriental poppy, looking very bedraggled now, but if I cut that back, again right to the ground, that will regrow and may well reflower in late August and September. So we've cut that back. So at this critical point in the year, now's the time to cut back, accept that the garden will look a little bit raggedy for a week or two, and then it will pick up again and last you into autumn. This can be a sort of process of being honest with your garden, because when you cut away things like this geranium farm, it does expose a lot of empty space within the border. It means that it's being dominant. But that's no bad thing. It's a chance to reassess, to add plants, maybe take some of that geranium out. But working with other people and sharing work is not just fun, it's been proven to be really therapeutic, good for our physical, mental and social well-being. And Adam has been along to see an in-city community project at its best.
Squeezed in between high-rise and residential streets in Edgbaston, Birmingham, is a totally unexpected space, a 6-acre oasis of calm in the heart of this city. This is Martineau Gardens, a community garden which has become a beacon for relaxation and education.
We might want to do other things like maybe...
Caroline Hutton is the glue here. She came in 17 years ago when this area was under threat of closure and helped regenerate it. When you came in, I suppose, what was the ambition?
just to be able to be open for another year.
Yeah, so it literally was that, just step by step.
Yes. It was to keep the place open for the people of Birmingham.
Yeah. And in essence, what do you think it brings to the community?
A place which feels like you can get lost in.
Yeah.
And a place where people can meet one another. Our gardens are looked after by people with mental health issues and learning disabilities. Those are people who are usually excluded. And here, they are doing something which is socially acceptable.
Yeah.
They're volunteering in a garden.
This place is very much about people, isn't it?
Yes. And we like to say that plants and people both need the right environment to grow.
I love that. And that sense of empowerment is what it's all about.
Okay guys, what you want to do is dig yourself a hole a little bit bigger than the pot.
Project leader Stuart runs a programme of horticultural therapy for 40 volunteers who have a range of health and learning difficulties. What do you think that people get out of it?
You can make mistakes with plants. Plants will grow again, you know what I mean? They're forgiving.
Yeah,
No, they're not going to talk back at you.
So what do you think that gives them? Do you think that, confidence? Do they feel relaxed when they come in?
It's their space, they've created all this, so it gives them ownership as well. Yeah. And it's that nature-nurture thing, so once you start to look after something, you then start to look after yourself as well, especially with mental health.
It's really engaging, isn't it?
I think once you've got your hands in the soil and you've got the light trickling, the rill here and the smells, you're distracted, you're not focusing on your illness.
And you've got a new area, mate, that you're working on. What was the thinking behind it?
With new shrubs, new plants that give off perfumes and scents, which the volunteers designed. Without them, this wouldn't be here. No. It really wouldn't be here.
So you guys haven't finished this quite yet? Apparently,
not yet.
I'm here to help, and if that's all right.
Lead the way.
Right, all. Cool. Right. Come on in, mate. See if it's deep enough, mate, shall we? It's not bad, is it? Not bad? How has it worked with you since the first time you came to the way you feel now?
Well, it made a huge difference for me because of the kind of isolation I was coming through my illness.
Yeah.
As soon as I walked through them gates, this is a completely different world for me.
Yeah.
And it was so tranquil and, it's that nature part of me. And it just makes me forget about the problems I have.
Yeah.
And it's giving me a self-esteem back.
Brian and Andrew are the Mothmen and have been recording the moths that have come through the garden for over 10 years. Oh,
That's a hawk moth.
Oh, look.
It's well behaved.
How often would you get something like that?
You get a year.
How many species would you get coming to the garden?
On our moth list, we've got 350.
Have you really?
Yes.
But it proves, though, doesn't it? You've, in a sense, this is a green oasis in the middle of a city.
Yes.
And what that attracts is unbelievable, really, isn't it?
That's right. So even in a city, you can find that many. Yeah.
Right, let's see what else we've got.
Oh, another one.
Another one?
Yes.
Oh, look.
Oh, come on.
Really?
Look at that.
They really are stunning, aren't they?
Oh, another one.
Really?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Andrew, I'd say your knowledge, mate, is fantastic. What do you think this place gives to the community?
What we're seeing is that the wildlife is thriving.
Yeah.
As a result of the way that we manage the site.
How many have we got today? One little count up, just give us a rough idea.
Right. I make it 17.
17. Yeah, see, look, there we go. I can be a lucky mascot. Or lucky moth Scott. There you go.
Yes.
The moths will be released once Brian and Andrew have finished identifying them. Caroline is in the process of passing on the baton, but she's left quite a legacy. What Caroline's done here is fantastic, and she really is a gardening hero. But the standout bit for me is that she's created a whole team of heroes, and that's what makes this a really special place.
We occasionally get hawk moths here, but I've certainly never seen more than one at a time. Now, these are a couple of rows of wallflowers that I sowed about a month ago, and they germinated well. The idea with wallflowers, or any biennial, is to grow a really good, strong plant between now and autumn. Towards that end, I need to thin them out. So to start with, I'm just going to thin out the smaller ones, like that, and look to leave a gap of about an inch between each plant. I will then, in about another month's time, lift them and space them out about 6 inches apart. If you haven't sown wallflowers, it's not too late to do so, and I will sow another couple of batches. And if you don't want to sow wallflowers, here are some other jobs you can do this weekend. In order to keep roses flowering for as long as possible, it is important to deadhead regularly, daily if you can. And don't just pull off the spent petals. But using a sharp pair of secateurs, prune right back to the next side shoot, be it a leaf or a bud. If you're growing cordon tomatoes, you want to maximize the amount of fruit per plant. So pinch out the side shoots that grow between the main stem and the leaf, as they take a lot of the energy away from the cordon. And as you do so, make sure that it is tied in securely. As soft fruit ripens, be it raspberries, currants or cherries, it is important to protect them from birds. Just drape a temporary netting over it, fixing it firmly at the top and the bottom, and also making sure it's taut so the birds can't get tangled. And leave it on for as long as it takes for the fruit to fully ripen and be harvested. I planted ramblers and climbers at the base of many of the apple trees here in the orchard about 3 years ago. And it took a year or two for them to get established, but they are there now. This is a rose called Albertine, and it has the most fabulous fragrance. And it is starting to climb up the tree. And obviously you have to help it a bit, so it's a continuing job. But I'm afraid we are not continuing because we've run out of time. And I shan't be back here at Longmeadow next week because it's Hampton Court and the team will all be there. And I will be returning here with you, I hope, on Thursday, the 12th of July at a slightly later time of 9 o'clock. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.